Tonight, dear friend, we travel back in time to the quiet American countryside of the year 1885. Before you settle into this peaceful journey, make yourself comfortable. Perhaps pull a warm blanket a little closer, let your shoulders relax, and allow the busy sounds of the modern world to gently fade into the distance. There is nowhere else to be, nothing urgent to finish, only a slow walk through a forgotten morning. The stars still shimmer softly above the rolling fields of the Midwest, where wide stretches of farmland disappear into the darkness. The moon hangs low above the horizon, casting a gentle silver glow across wooden fences, sleeping orchards, and long rows of corn that whisper whenever the lightest breeze passes through them. Far away, a small white farmhouse rests quietly beneath towering oak trees. Its windows are dark. Its chimney no longer sends smoke into the sky. Only the faint outline of the old red barn stands nearby, watching over the sleeping animals that have spent the night sheltered from the cool spring air. The year is 1885. Electric lights have not yet reached this little community. The nearest town is several miles away, connected only by dusty wagon roads that become muddy after every rainstorm. Most families here measure time not by clocks but by the rising sun, the changing seasons, and the dependable rhythm of everyday work. Life moves slowly. No automobiles rush down these country roads. No engines hum in the distance. Only nature decides when another day begins. A gentle wind carries the fresh scent of damp earth mixed with cut hay stored inside the barn. Somewhere beyond the fields, a creek quietly follows its winding path between smooth stones, never hurrying, never stopping. If you listen carefully, you may notice tiny sounds hidden inside the silence. Leaves brushing together, a horse shifting its weight inside the stable, the soft rustle of straw, an owl finishing its final hunt before dawn. Everything feels calm. Everything waits patiently. Inside the farmhouse, the Miller family remains asleep beneath handmade patchwork quilts sewn during long winter evenings. The wooden floors beneath them creak softly as the old house slowly settles with the changing temperature of the night. Nothing about this home is luxurious, yet everything has been built with care. The sturdy oak beams overhead were cut from nearby forests years before. The stone fireplace was assembled one heavy rock at a time. The dining table bears countless small scratches from decades of family meals, children's lessons, and careful repairs of farming tools. Every mark tells a quiet story. Every object has earned its place. Near the fireplace rests a pair of worn leather boots, still carrying dried traces of yesterday's fieldwork. Beside them hangs a broad-brimmed straw hat whose edges have slowly faded beneath countless summers beneath the American sun. Tomorrow, or rather, in only a little while, those boots will once again cross the dew-covered grass. But not yet. The house still belongs to the peaceful silence before morning. Upstairs, 12-year-old Thomas Miller sleeps deeply beside the small bedroom window. His room is simple. A narrow wooden bed, a handmade quilt stitched by his grandmother, a small bookshelf holding only a few treasured volumes, a carved wooden horse that his father patiently shaped during quiet winter nights beside the fire. Unlike many children today, Thomas has never heard the sound of an airplane. He has never seen an electric street lamp. His world stretches only as far as horses can comfortably travel in a day's journey. And somehow, that world feels wonderfully complete. Across the hallway, his younger sister Clara dreams peacefully beneath another patchwork quilt. Tomorrow she will help gather fresh eggs before breakfast, just as she has done many mornings before. She knows each chicken by its color. She knows which hen prefers the old apple tree. She knows where the smallest eggs are usually hidden beneath soft straw. These are not remarkable skills to anyone living here. They are simply part of growing up. Downstairs, their parents sleep lightly. Jacob Miller has farmed this land since inheriting it from his own father nearly 15 years ago. His hands carry the rough texture that only honest work can create. Each callus tells of repaired fences, harvested wheat, sharpened plow blades, cold autumn mornings, and long summer afternoons beneath a patient sun. Beside him rests his wife, Sarah. Long before sunrise, she will quietly rise without needing anyone to wake her. She will light the kitchen stove, mix fresh biscuit dough, prepare coffee, and begin another ordinary day that, to her family, feels quietly extraordinary. Outside, the eastern horizon begins to change. Not brightly, not suddenly. Only the faintest ribbon of pale blue slowly appears beneath the fading stars. Night gently loosens its hold on the countryside. The fields remain wrapped in mist. Tiny drops of dew cling to every blade of grass, sparkling whenever the earliest hint of daylight reaches them. Soon, the first rooster will announce the morning. But for one final peaceful moment, the entire farm simply breathes. The first rooster finally breaks the silence. Its familiar call echoes across the sleeping valley, drifting over split-rail fences, quiet orchards, and dew-covered pastures. One by one, other roosters answer from neighboring farms, their voices carrying through the cool spring air like gentle morning bells. Inside the Miller farmhouse, Jacob Miller slowly opens his eyes. There is no alarm clock beside his bed, no ringing bell, no hurried rush. For years, his body has learned the dependable rhythm of the seasons. Long before the first rays of sunlight touch the fields, he is awake. The bedroom remains dim, lit only by the pale blue glow filtering through the small window. Sarah stirs quietly beside him, already thinking about the morning meal before her feet even touch the floor. She carefully slips from beneath the warm quilt, making every effort not to wake the children too soon. The wooden floor feels cool beneath her bare feet. She wraps a knitted wool shawl around her shoulders before quietly making her way downstairs. Each step produces a soft creak from the old staircase, a sound so familiar that no one in the family notices it anymore. In the kitchen, yesterday's ashes still rest inside the cast-iron stove. Sarah kneels patiently before the firebox. From a small basket beside the hearth, she gathers dry, kindling, thin pine sticks and a few carefully saved pieces of oak. With practiced hands, she strikes a match. A tiny flame appears. Soon another. The fire slowly comes alive. Golden light begins dancing across the worn wooden walls, filling the room with warmth that feels especially comforting in the cool spring morning. Before long, the gentle aroma of burning oak mingles with the faint scent of fresh flour stored inside cloth sacks near the pantry. On the heavy wooden counter waits a large ceramic mixing bowl. Sarah measures flour without scales. Years of baking have taught her hands exactly how much each loaf requires. A small pinch of salt, fresh milk from yesterday evening, rendered lard kept cool in a stone crock. She mixes the dough slowly, pressing and folding it with calm, steady movements. Outside, dawn continues its quiet arrival. Mist still blankets the low fields beyond the farmhouse. Tiny droplets cling to every fence post and blade of grass. The horses inside the barn sense that morning has begun. One gently stamps a hoof. Another softly nickers toward the stable door. Nearby, dairy cows shift patiently inside their wooden stalls, waiting for the familiar hands that soon will bring fresh hay and begin the morning milking. The farm awakens not with noise, but with quiet expectation. Upstairs, Thomas stretches beneath his quilt. For a brief moment, he listens. The rooster, the crackling stove below, the distant lowing of cattle. These sounds have greeted nearly every morning of his young life. He smiles without opening his eyes. He already knows what today will bring. Hard work, fresh air, simple meals, and another evening gathered around the family table. Across the hall, Clara hears the soft clucking of hens outside her bedroom window. She sits up carefully and brushes a loose strand of hair behind her ear. She enjoys collecting eggs before breakfast. Sometimes they are still pleasantly warm. Sometimes a curious hen watches her every movement as though protecting a treasured secret. She quietly dresses in a simple cotton dress and pulls on sturdy leather shoes that have already seen many seasons of farm life. Downstairs, the scent of fresh biscuits now fills nearly every corner of the house. Jacob enters the kitchen carrying yesterday's lantern. Its flame has long since gone out, no longer needed as daylight slowly brightens the eastern sky. He hangs it beside the door before washing his hands in cool well water poured into a porcelain basin. The water feels crisp against his weathered skin. It wakes him more completely than coffee ever could. Sarah places thick slices of cured ham into a cast iron skillet. Soon the gentle sizzling joins the crackling fire. A kettle begins to whisper as steam slowly escapes from its spout. Everything happens without hurry. No one raises their voice. No one watches a clock. The family follows a rhythm older than memory itself. A rhythm guided by sunrise, weather, animals, and the changing seasons. Outside, the first golden sunlight finally reaches the highest branches of the great oak tree beside the barn. Its warm light slowly slides across the farmhouse roof before spilling into the yard below. The dew sparkles like countless tiny crystals. A robin lands on the fence, tilting its head as though inspecting the peaceful farm before beginning its cheerful morning song. For another ordinary day has quietly begun on the Miller farm. Jacob steps outside with his favorite enamel mug warming his hands. The coffee is simple, strong, and lightly sweetened with a spoonful of molasses, but he never drinks it quickly. Morning, in his view, deserves patience. The porch boards creak beneath his boots as he pauses for a quiet moment. Before any chore begins, he always looks across the farm. It is a habit passed down from his father, not to count work waiting to be done, but to appreciate what another sunrise has gently returned. The eastern sky now glows with soft shades of peach, pale gold, and delicate blue. Wisps of mist drift lazily above the pasture, wrapping the fences in a veil that will soon disappear beneath the growing warmth of the day. A meadowlark begins its cheerful song from the top of a weathered fence post. Another answers from somewhere near the creek. Their melodies weave together with the distant murmur of flowing water and the gentle rustling of cottonwood leaves. The countryside has become a quiet orchestra. Jacob takes one final sip before setting the mug beside the porch railing. The workday may be long, but it always begins gently. He walks toward the barn. The damp earth presses softly beneath his boots. Fresh tracks from a wandering rabbit cross the narrow footpath before disappearing into tall grass sparkling with dew. The large barn doors open with a familiar groan. Inside, warm air carries the comforting sense of hay, leather harnesses, clean pine boards, and healthy livestock. Sunlight filters through narrow wooden gaps high above, sending long golden beams across floating dust that drifts almost lazily through the still air. The horses immediately recognize his footsteps. Old Charlie, a dependable chestnut gelding, raises his head first. His ears point forward. His dark eyes remain calm. Jacob smiles. "Good morning, old friend," he whispers almost automatically. Charlie answers with a soft nicker. Beside him stands Daisy, a gentle gray mare whose patient temperament has made her the favorite of both Thomas and Clara since they were very young. Jacob gently strokes her neck. Her coat feels warm despite the cool morning. Nearby, several dairy cows wait quietly within sturdy wooden stalls lined with fresh straw gathered only yesterday afternoon. Each animal has its own personality. Bessie always watches every movement. Rose prefers eating before anything else. Little June, the youngest cow, still seems curious about nearly everything around her. Thomas soon appears carrying 2 polished tin milk pails. He has already washed his face in cold well water and combed his sandy hair as neatly as any 12-year-old boy can manage. His oversized suspenders sit slightly crooked despite Sarah's careful adjustments earlier that morning. Jacob notices. Without saying a word, he gently straightens one strap before handing Thomas a small wooden milking stool. Neither of them speaks much. They do not need to. Years of working together have created an easy understanding that words rarely improve. Thomas kneels beside Bessie. He rests one hand lightly against her side, allowing her to recognize his familiar touch before beginning. The steady rhythm soon fills the barn. Milk splashes gently against the bottom of the tin pail, soft, even, almost musical, again and again. Outside, swallows dart gracefully beneath the barn roof, gathering tiny insects already dancing in the warming morning light. Their swift movements contrast with the slow, patient work taking place inside. Meanwhile, Clara carries her woven willow basket toward the chicken yard. The hens greet her with energetic clucking as though they have been waiting only for her arrival. She laughs quietly. "You certainly have plenty to say this morning." One by one she checks the nesting boxes. Some eggs are creamy white. Others carry soft shades of pale brown. Each one is still pleasantly warm. She handles every egg carefully before placing it into the basket cushioned with clean straw. One stubborn hen refuses to leave her nest. Clara smiles knowingly. She has met this particular bird's determination many times before. Rather than disturb her immediately, Clara gently strokes the feathers along her back while speaking in the calm voice that animals seem to understand surprisingly well. Within moments, the hen reluctantly steps aside. Hidden beneath her are 3 perfect eggs. Clara grins with quiet satisfaction, not because she has won, but because another small morning mystery has been solved. Near the orchard, Sarah hangs freshly washed kitchen towels on a simple clothesline stretched between 2 sturdy maple trees. The fabric catches the soft breeze, dancing gently against the brightening sky. The scent of homemade soap lingers in the air. Nearby, an iron kettle simmers quietly above the kitchen stove, filling the farmhouse with comforting warmth that drifts through the open windows. Soon breakfast will gather everyone around the same table. Not because a clock demands it, but because the farm itself follows a dependable rhythm that every member of the Miller family has learned by heart. As the sun climbs a little higher above the horizon, its golden light reaches every corner of the homestead. The fields shine, the orchard awakens, the garden glistens with dew. Another peaceful spring morning has fully arrived, carrying with it the quiet promise that even the simplest day can become a memory worth keeping. Breakfast around the farm table. The rich aroma of freshly baked biscuits drifted far beyond the kitchen, slipping through the open windows and into the cool spring air. It mingled with the scent of damp earth, fresh grass, and the faint sweetness of blooming apple blossoms that surrounded the farmhouse. Inside, the kitchen had become the warmest place on the property. Golden firelight still flickered inside the cast iron stove, although the growing daylight now streamed gently through the lace curtains. Together, the fire and the morning sun filled the room with a peaceful glow that softened every wooden surface. Sarah lifted another tray of biscuits from the oven. Their tops were lightly browned. Steam escaped through tiny cracks in the flaky crust, carrying the comforting smell of fresh bread throughout the house. She placed them carefully inside a woven basket lined with a clean linen cloth, helping them stay warm until everyone gathered. Nearby, thick slices of cured ham rested on a heavy cast iron platter beside scrambled eggs cooked slowly with fresh butter from yesterday's churning. A small crock of homemade apple butter waited beside a jar of wildflower honey collected from a neighbor's beehives the previous autumn. Nothing on the table had traveled very far. Almost every bite had come from the farm itself or from nearby families who traded with one another throughout the year. Fresh milk sat inside a cool stone pitcher. Its cream had already begun rising toward the top. Beside it rested a simple blue and white ceramic bowl filled with oatmeal sweetened with maple syrup gathered during the final weeks of winter. Breakfast was never hurried. It was the quiet beginning of the day's work. Thomas entered first, carrying 2 full milk pails with careful steps. Jacob followed behind, washing his hands once more in cool well water before sitting at the head of the sturdy oak table. His leather gloves remained beside the doorway. Work could wait just a little longer. Clara soon arrived with her basket of freshly gathered eggs. She proudly placed it near her mother. "I found 3 under old Margaret today," she said with a gentle smile. Sarah looked inside the basket. She always likes to keep a little surprise hidden. Everyone laughed softly. Old Margaret, the family's oldest hen, had earned a reputation for choosing the most unexpected nesting places every spring. Sometimes beneath wagon wheels, sometimes inside empty barrels. Once, she had somehow reached the hayloft. The memory still made Thomas grin. Jacob bowed his head. Without ceremony or lengthy words, the family quietly offered thanks for another morning, another meal, and another season of growing life upon the land. Outside the kitchen windows, swallows continued darting through the brightening sky. A gentle breeze stirred the curtains. The smell of fresh coffee lingered in the room. Breakfast began. Warm biscuits were broken open while steam curled upward. Butter melted almost instantly into their soft centers. Apple butter spread easily across the golden surface. The first bite was always everyone's favorite. No one rushed to speak. The simple sounds of breakfast filled the room instead, forks resting against ceramic plates. Coffee gently poured into thick stone mugs, the quiet crackle of the fire, birdsong floating through the open windows. Even silence felt welcoming here. Thomas reached for another biscuit. "You'll need that," Jacob said with an amused smile. "We've got plenty waiting in the north field today." Thomas nodded eagerly. He had been looking forward to helping repair the old fence that bordered the pasture. Winter storms had loosened several rails, and one section leaned enough for curious calves to squeeze through. Repairing fences wasn't exciting work, but it was honest work. And honest work was something Jacob valued deeply. Clara listened while slowly stirring honey into her oatmeal. Her own morning would be different. She planned to help Sarah tend the kitchen garden before washing clothes beside the hand pump. Later, she hoped to gather fresh herbs growing along the stone wall behind the smokehouse. Every member of the household contributed. Even the youngest carried responsibilities. Yet none of those responsibilities felt heavy. They simply belonged to everyday life. Sarah finally sat down after making certain everyone else had been served. Only then did she prepare her own plate. Jacob noticed. "As always," he said quietly, "you should have been first." She smiled warmly. "I enjoy watching everyone else enjoy breakfast." That answer never changed, nor did Jacob's grateful expression. Outside, sunlight continued climbing higher. Its golden rays now reached the vegetable garden where neat rows of onions, cabbage, beans, and potatoes pushed steadily through rich black soil prepared weeks earlier. Tiny droplets of dew sparkled like scattered glass before slowly disappearing beneath the growing warmth. Beyond the garden stretched wide fields, waiting patiently for another day's care. The horses grazed quietly inside the pasture. The cows rested peacefully after milking. Even the chickens seemed content as they scratched beneath the orchard trees, searching for insects hidden among fallen blossoms. Life moved at its own gentle pace. No whistle announced the beginning of work. No factory bell echoed across the countryside. The land itself decided the rhythm. Jacob finished the last sip of coffee before standing. He carefully placed his napkin beside the empty plate. Time to see what the day has planned for us. Thomas rose immediately. Clara carried empty dishes toward the wash basin. Sarah gathered crumbs for the chickens waiting outside. Within only a few quiet minutes, the farmhouse returned to motion once again. Not hurried, not chaotic, simply purposeful. As Jacob and Thomas stepped back onto the porch, the morning had fully arrived. The mist had almost vanished. Blue skies stretched across the countryside. A pair of red-tailed hawks circled high above the distant hills, carried effortlessly by rising currents of warm spring air. Far beyond the Miller farm, another neighbor guided a team of draft horses toward freshly plowed fields. Thin columns of chimney smoke rose peacefully from scattered farmhouses across the valley. Each family was beginning its own ordinary day. Different chores, different fields, yet connected by the same steady rhythm of rural America in 1885. Jacob rested one hand upon the porch railing for a brief moment. He breathed deeply. The air carried the scents of fresh hay, apple blossoms, rich soil, and clean spring water flowing somewhere beyond the trees. "There isn't a finer morning," he said quietly. Thomas looked across the endless fields glowing beneath the gentle sunshine. For him, this landscape was more than home. It was the entire world he knew, and his father and son walked together toward the waiting pasture. Another peaceful chapter of farm life, quietly unfolded beneath the bright American sky. Mending the north fence, Jacob and Thomas walked side by side toward the north pasture, their steady footsteps following a narrow dirt lane worn smooth by countless seasons of wagons, boots, and grazing livestock. The farmhouse slowly disappeared behind them, partly hidden by rows of maple and oak whose fresh spring leaves shimmered softly beneath the gentle morning breeze. The warmth of breakfast still lingered pleasantly, but now another familiar rhythm quietly took over, the rhythm of work. It was never hurried, never noisy, only steady. Morning sunlight stretched long golden shadows across the fields as tiny insects hovered above the dew-covered grass. Every blade sparkled like polished crystal before slowly drying beneath the strengthening sun. Thomas carried a wooden toolbox that had belonged to his grandfather. Its corners were rounded from decades of use. The iron latch had darkened with age. Inside rested only a few carefully maintained tools. A wooden mallet, an old crosscut saw, a brace and bit, several hand-forged nails, a draw knife, a small oilstone for sharpening blades. Nothing inside was expensive. Everything inside mattered. Jacob believed a good tool deserved respect because it often served more faithfully than many possessions costing 10 times as much. As they reached the first pasture gate, Jacob paused only long enough to lift the simple wooden latch. The gate swung open with a familiar creak. Beyond it stretched nearly 40 acres of gently rolling pasture bordered by split-rail fences that wandered across the countryside like quiet wooden ribbons following the natural curves of the land. Several Hereford cattle grazed peacefully beneath scattered walnut trees. One calf looked up curiously before returning to the fresh grass without concern. A pair of bluebirds darted between fence posts, pausing briefly before continuing their morning search for insects hidden among the clover blossoms. "There it is," Jacob said softly. Thomas followed his father's gaze. Nearly 50 yards ahead, one section of fence leaned noticeably toward the pasture. Several rails had slipped loose after heavy winter snow and early spring rains softened the supporting posts. The damage was not dramatic. Yet even small problems deserved timely attention. Jacob often reminded Thomas that farms rarely failed because of one great mistake. Instead, they suffered when little repairs were ignored season after season. They reached the damaged section and quietly examined every post before touching a single tool. Jacob never hurried into repairs. Observation came first. He pressed one weathered post gently with both hands. It shifted several inches. "The post itself isn't rotten," he said. Thomas knelt beside the base. "The ground's just loose." Jacob nodded with quiet approval. "Exactly!" Thomas smiled. He enjoyed those simple moments when his father confirmed his observations. Lessons on the farm rarely came through long explanations. Most arrived through patient experience. Together they removed the loose rails one by one, stacking them carefully upon the grass. Each piece of oak still remained remarkably solid despite years of wind, rain, summer heat, and winter frost. Jacob ran his rough hand along one rail. "White oak." Thomas nodded immediately. "Grandfather cut these." "He certainly did. They've lasted a long time. They were meant to." Jacob smiled. When a man builds something well, sometimes he helps people he'll never meet. Thomas considered those words while lifting another rail. Perhaps someday someone would repair fences built by him. The thought quietly pleased him. Jacob dug around the leaning post using a narrow iron digging bar. The damp earth gave way easily. Fresh soil smelled rich and cool, carrying the unmistakable scent of spring. Tiny earthworms slowly disappeared beneath loosened clumps as sunlight reached places hidden for many months. Nearby, wild violets bloomed beneath the fence line. Clusters of delicate purple flowers seemed almost too beautiful for such an ordinary place. Yet farms were filled with unnoticed beauty. One simply had to slow down enough to see it. A gentle breeze crossed the pasture. The tall grass moved together like quiet ocean waves. Somewhere beyond the distant hill came the steady tapping of a woodpecker searching for insects hidden beneath aging bark. Farther away still, the faint whistle of a passing freight train drifted across the countryside. The railroad lay nearly 7 miles from the Miller farm. Its distant sound reminded everyone that the nation beyond these peaceful fields continued growing busier each year. Thomas listened carefully. "I wonder where it's going." Jacob leaned against his shovel. "Maybe Chicago or St. Louis. Maybe even farther." Thomas looked toward the horizon. "I've never seen either." Jacob smiled thoughtfully. "Neither had my father when he was your age." For several quiet moments neither spoke. The train whistle gradually faded into silence. Although the railroad connected distant cities with astonishing speed for its time, Jacob never felt rushed by it. His own life followed older rhythms: sunrise, rainfall, harvest, winter, planting. These were the clocks that truly mattered here. Once the hole had been deepened, Jacob and Thomas carefully lifted the heavy post back into position. The rough timber felt solid beneath their hands. Thomas steadied it while Jacob checked its alignment by eye. No measuring instrument, no complicated device, only years of experience. A little toward you, Thomas adjusted it slightly. "There," Jacob smiled again. "Perfect." Together they shoveled fresh earth back around the base. Every few inches, Jacob used a heavy tamping bar to pack the soil firmly. Thud, thud, thud. Each measured strike echoed softly across the quiet pasture. The rhythm became strangely calming. Birdsong continued overhead. Grass whispered in the breeze. Clouds drifted lazily across an endless blue sky. Nothing hurried the morning forward. After securing the post, they lifted the first split rail back into place. Its weathered surface carried tiny cracks created by countless changing seasons. Yet the oak remained strong. Jacob often admired old wood. It aged honestly, without pretending to be new, without hiding its years, much like the people who worked this land. As Thomas reached for the second rail, something small darted from beneath a nearby patch of grass. He froze. A tiny cottontail rabbit. Its ears stood alert. Its nose twitched rapidly. For a brief moment it remained perfectly still, almost blending into the soft brown earth before quietly hopping toward a nearby blackberry thicket. Thomas watched until it disappeared completely. Jacob smiled without interrupting the silence. Even little encounters like this had become part of ordinary farm life. No one chased it. No one frightened it. The rabbit belonged here just as surely as the cattle, the birds, the fences, and the people. The farm was shared, not owned entirely by any one living thing. A red-tailed hawk circled high overhead, carried effortlessly upon warm rising air. Its broad wings barely moved. Patient, graceful, watching the fields below with remarkable calm. Thomas shaded his eyes. It hardly flaps at all. Jacob looked upward. It doesn't have to. The wind does most of the work. Thomas followed the bird until it became little more than a dark silhouette against the bright blue sky. He wondered what the countryside looked like from such a height. Perhaps every farm appeared like a carefully stitched quilt. Green fields, brown roads, silver creeks, red barns, white farmhouses, tiny people beginning another peaceful day. The thought stayed with him as he returned quietly to his work. Along the creek and the spring planting, by the time the final fence rail had settled firmly into place, the morning sun had climbed well above the eastern hills. The long shadows that had stretched across the pasture slowly withdrew beneath the feet of the grazing cattle, leaving the fields wrapped in a gentle warmth that promised another pleasant spring day. Jacob rested both hands upon the repaired fence and quietly tested its strength. It did not move, not even slightly. He gave a small nod of satisfaction. "There," he said softly. "It should stand for many more seasons." Thomas leaned against the smooth oak rail beside him. His palms carried the faint scent of fresh wood and damp earth, while a thin layer of dust clung to the knees of his trousers. He did not mind. On the Miller farm, dusty clothes usually meant an honest morning. The cattle wandered closer, almost as if they wished to inspect the finished work for themselves. One curious calf cautiously stretched its nose toward Thomas's sleeve. He laughed quietly. "You've come to inspect our work?" The calf answered only by sniffing his hand before returning to the sweet spring grass. Jacob smiled without looking up. "Animals notice more than people think." He picked up the worn wooden toolbox, closing its iron latch with a gentle click. "Come on," he said. "Let's walk down to the creek before heading back." Thomas eagerly followed. The narrow footpath curved gently downhill through waving grass sprinkled with tiny buttercups and wild daisies. Every few yards, another bird lifted into the bright blue sky before settling somewhere farther ahead. The countryside seemed wonderfully alive, yet nothing felt hurried. A gentle breeze drifted through young maple leaves, creating a soft whisper that blended perfectly with distant birdsong. Soon they reached the creek. Clear spring water slipped quietly over smooth stones polished by countless seasons. Sunlight danced across its rippling surface, turning ordinary water into thousands of tiny flashes of silver. Thomas knelt beside the bank. He dipped one hand into the cool current. The water felt wonderfully cold after working beneath the growing warmth of the sun. Tiny minnows darted between rounded stones, disappearing almost as quickly as they appeared. Along the muddy edge of the creek, delicate tracks crossed the damp soil. Thomas leaned closer. "Raccoon?" Jacob studied them carefully. "Last night, I'd say." Nearby were smaller prints. A fox passed here too. Thomas looked around with growing curiosity. They were both here? Probably hours apart. Jacob sat comfortably beneath a large sycamore tree whose broad branches stretched over the creek like a natural shelter. "The farm isn't ours alone." Thomas remembered something his father had once told him years before. "We're only borrowing it." Jacob smiled. "Exactly." The creek belonged to everything that drank from it. The deer, the foxes, the rabbits, the birds, even the turtles sunning themselves upon fallen logs. The Miller family simply shared it. A painted turtle slowly slid from a warm rock into the water with barely a splash. Concentric circles spread quietly across the surface before fading away. Neither father nor son spoke. There seemed no need. The peaceful silence carried its own conversation. Above them, cottonwood leaves shimmered like tiny silver coins whenever the breeze turned them toward the sunlight. Somewhere farther downstream came the rhythmic tapping of water against an old fallen log lodged between two rocks. Nature seemed perfectly content with repetition. The same sounds, the same gentle movements. Day after day, season after season, Jacob often wondered if people slept more peacefully because they spent their days listening to such quiet rhythms. Eventually he stood. "We'd better head back." Sarah would already be working in the garden. The spring planting could not wait forever. As they approached the farmhouse once again, the scent of freshly turned soil drifted across the yard. Sure enough, Sarah and Clara were already tending the kitchen garden. Long straight rows stretched neatly across the rich dark earth. Young onion shoots stood proudly in one section. Nearby, peas had begun climbing slender wooden supports carefully tied together only days earlier. Sarah knelt beside a row of beans, gently pressing loose soil around each tender stem. Her straw bonnet shaded her face from the strengthening sunshine while protecting her fair skin during the long hours she spent outdoors. Clara carried a small watering can, carefully pouring just enough water around the youngest seedlings. She moved slowly, almost thoughtfully. Every little plant seemed worthy of individual attention. Jacob leaned upon the garden fence for a moment. "Everything growing well?" Sarah looked up with a warm smile. "So far." She brushed a loose strand of hair beneath her bonnet. "If the weather stays kind another week, we'll have a beautiful start." Thomas crouched beside a row of tiny cabbage plants. It amazed him that something so small could eventually feed the family months later. Sarah noticed him watching. "Gardens teach patience," Thomas nodded. "You can't hurry them." "No," she smiled, "and that's one of their greatest lessons." A honeybee drifted lazily between blooming apple blossoms before disappearing into a patch of wildflowers planted beside the vegetable beds. Nearby, several butterflies floated gently through the warm air, their delicate wings catching sunlight with every graceful movement. The entire garden seemed quietly alive. Jacob reached into a wooden crate resting beneath the porch. Inside lay carefully saved seed packets from the previous autumn. Each handwritten label represented hope: sweet corn, pumpkin, turnips, beets, carrots. Every spring began with simple seeds. Every autumn rewarded quiet faith. Thomas accepted one small cloth sack filled with corn kernels selected from last year's strongest harvest. Jacob handed him a narrow wooden planting stick. "We'll start with the south field after dinner." Thomas smiled. Planting corn always felt like the true beginning of the farming season. He knew the work ahead would be long, walking row after row beneath the open sky, making each hole by hand, dropping 2 or 3 kernels, covering them carefully, repeating the same motion hundreds of times. Yet he looked forward to it, because every planted seed carried a quiet promise, not certainty, only possibility. And on farms, possibility was often enough to inspire hope. A church bell echoed faintly across the valley. Its gentle tone floated through the warm spring air before fading among the distant hills. Sarah glanced toward the sound. "Nearly noon already," Jacob smiled. "Time moves differently outside." He looked across the fields glowing beneath the bright American sun. There were still fences to inspect, seeds to plant, tools to clean, animals to feed. But there would also be time for rest beneath the shade of the old oak, time for laughter around the supper table, and, when evening returned, another peaceful sunset over the quiet fields of the Miller farm, planting hope beneath the spring sun. The church bell's final echo slowly disappeared across the valley, leaving only the quiet voices of birds and the gentle rustling of fresh spring leaves. The Miller farm settled once again into its familiar rhythm, where every hour seemed guided more by sunlight than by the hands of a clock. Jacob carried the cloth sack of seed corn beneath one arm as he crossed the farmyard. Thomas followed with the wooden planting stick resting across his shoulder. The south field waited beyond the orchard, its rich earth freshly turned only a few days earlier by the steady strength of Charlie and Daisy pulling the walking plow. Dark rows stretched across the gentle hillside with remarkable precision. Each furrow followed the natural curve of the land rather than forcing the earth into perfectly straight lines. Jacob believed farming should work with nature whenever possible, not against it. As they reached the field, both paused for a quiet moment. The soil looked healthy, loose, dark, moist from several gentle spring showers that had arrived exactly when needed. Jacob bent down and scooped a handful into his palm. He rubbed the earth slowly between his fingers. It crumbled easily. "This is good ground," he said softly. Thomas knelt beside him. The rich scent of fresh soil filled the warm air. It smelled alive, not merely like dirt, but like something quietly preparing for another season of growth. He had always enjoyed that smell. It reminded him that life often began in places people rarely noticed. Jacob handed him the planting stick. "We'll keep about 3 feet between each row." Thomas nodded. He already knew the routine. Still, he appreciated hearing the familiar instructions every spring. Some lessons deserved repeating. Jacob pressed the pointed end of the stick into the earth. One clean hole. Thomas dropped 3 golden kernels into the opening. Jacob gently covered them with loose soil using the toe of his boot. Then they stepped forward together. Again, another hole. 3 kernels, soft earth. Forward once more. The work quickly settled into a peaceful rhythm. Neither hurried. Neither counted how many rows remained. Instead, they focused only upon the next small task waiting directly before them. Above the open field, white clouds drifted lazily across a sky so blue it seemed almost endless. A red-winged blackbird perched atop a weathered fence post, calling proudly over the quiet countryside. Farther away, meadowlarks answered with cheerful songs that rose and fell upon the gentle breeze. The sounds never interrupted the silence. They became part of it. Thomas glanced toward the distant farmhouse. From this far away it appeared surprisingly small. Thin curls of chimney smoke still rose gently into the spring air. Near the clothesline, Sarah and Clara continued moving quietly about the yard, their figures softened by distance until they almost blended into the peaceful landscape itself. Everything seemed connected. The garden, the barn, the fields, the orchard, the creek. Every corner of the farm depended upon the others. Jacob paused beside another row. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "your grandfather used to say that planting corn teaches a man something different every year." Thomas smiled. "What did it teach him?" Jacob looked across the field before answering. "Patience when the rain came late." He pressed another hole into the earth. "Gratitude when it came early." Another seed dropped gently into place. "And humility when storms reminded him who truly controlled the harvest." Thomas considered those words carefully. The farm offered lessons that could never be found inside books alone. They were learned through seasons, through waiting, through watching, through accepting both success and disappointment with the same quiet heart. A gentle breeze swept across the field once more. carrying the sweet fragrance of blooming apple trees from the nearby orchard. Honeybees moved steadily from blossom to blossom, so busy with their own important work that they paid little attention to the people below. Jacob smiled as he watched them. "Those little workers never waste a fine spring morning." Thomas laughed softly. "I suppose we shouldn't either." By early afternoon, several neat rows had already been planted, the field slowly transformed behind them. Nothing dramatic had changed. No towering structure had appeared. No great invention had been built. Only tiny seeds hidden beneath the soil. Yet Jacob knew that today's quiet work would shape the months ahead. Summer would bring tall green stalks. Autumn would bring full ears of corn. Winter would bring warm meals shared around the family table. Everything began here, with small acts completed faithfully. As the sun climbed higher, its warmth became pleasantly noticeable upon their shoulders. Neither complained. Spring sunshine felt welcome after the long gray months of winter. Occasionally they paused beneath the shade of an old walnut tree standing near the edge of the field. Jacob removed his broad-brimmed straw hat for a moment, allowing the breeze to cool his forehead. Thomas drank deeply from a stoneware jug filled with cool well water wrapped in damp cloth to keep it fresh. The water tasted wonderfully clean. No drink ever seemed quite as refreshing after honest work beneath an open sky. While they rested, a horse-drawn wagon appeared upon the distant county road. Its wooden wheels rolled slowly through a thin cloud of pale dust. Thomas shaded his eyes. "I think that's Mr. Harper." Jacob looked up. "It is!" The elderly neighbor raised one hand in greeting as he passed. Jacob answered with the same simple gesture. No words were exchanged. None were necessary. Neighbors recognized one another not by conversation alone, but by countless small acts of quiet respect repeated through the years. The wagon disappeared beyond a gentle rise. Soon only the faint rumble of wooden wheels remained before even that faded into silence. Jacob stood once again. "Ready?" Thomas smiled. "Always." Together they returned to the waiting rows, continuing the peaceful work that generations before them had done beneath the same wide American sky. One hole, 3 kernels, a handful of earth, another hopeful step forward. The afternoon stretched before them, calm and unhurried, carrying with it the quiet promise that every harvest begins with simple faith beneath the gentle light of spring. A quiet evening at Harper's General Store. The final handful of corn seed disappeared beneath the soft earth just as the afternoon sun began its slow journey toward the western hills. Jacob straightened his back, gently brushing loose soil from his worn work trousers before looking across the newly planted rows. From one end of the field to the other, the fresh furrows rested peacefully beneath the golden sunlight. Nothing green could yet be seen, only dark earth. Yet both father and son understood that an entire summer quietly slept beneath those neat rows. Thomas rested the planting stick against his shoulder. "It doesn't look very different," Jacob smiled warmly. "The biggest changes usually happen where we can't see them." Thomas looked over the field once more. He liked that thought. Seeds did not hurry. Neither did good farms. A gentle breeze crossed the hillside, carrying with it the pleasant fragrance of blooming clover growing along the fence line. Honeybees drifted lazily from flower to flower while a pair of swallows swept low across the open field, catching tiny insects almost without effort. The countryside seemed perfectly balanced. Nothing moved too quickly. Nothing remained completely still. Jacob lifted the empty cloth seed sack. "I promised Mr. Harper I'd stop by his store before supper." Thomas looked up. "Can I come?" "I was hoping you would." The two returned to the farmhouse, where Sarah had already placed cool well water on the porch for them. After washing the soil from their hands and faces, Jacob exchanged his dusty work hat for the clean felt hat he wore whenever traveling into the village. Thomas did the same, carefully brushing the remaining dust from his boots. Sarah smiled as she handed Jacob a neatly folded list. "If Mr. Harper has fresh lamp oil, flour, and another spool of thread, we'll be ready for quite some time." Jacob tucked the list safely inside his vest pocket. "We won't be long." Charlie, their dependable chestnut horse, was already waiting beside the small wagon. His leather harness had been cleaned only a few evenings earlier until every brass buckle reflected the afternoon light. Jacob gently stroked the horse's neck. "You've earned an easier job today," Charlie answered with a slow, contented breath. The wagon rolled quietly down the familiar dirt road. Its wooden wheels produced the comforting rhythm that every farming family knew by heart. Clop, rattle, clop, rattle. The sound blended naturally with birdsong and the distant murmur of wind moving through young oak leaves. Thomas rested one arm along the wagon seat. Traveling by wagon gave him time to notice details that hurried people often missed. Wild violets bloomed beside shallow ditches. Butterflies floated above patches of fresh grass. Stone fences stretched across rolling hills exactly as they had for decades. Every mile revealed another peaceful scene. Before long, the small crossroads village appeared beyond a gentle rise. Several white-painted buildings stood neatly beside the main road. A modest church overlooked the square. Nearby stood the blacksmith's shop, where occasional metallic ringing drifted into the warm afternoon air. Children chased one another beneath a large maple tree while their mothers exchanged quiet conversation nearby. Nobody seemed rushed. The village moved at the comfortable pace of everyday life. Jacob guided Charlie toward a weathered wooden building with a broad porch stretching across its front. A hand-painted sign gently swayed above the entrance. Harper's General Store. Several hitching posts stood nearby. 2 wagons had already arrived before them. Jacob secured Charlie's reins before stepping onto the porch with Thomas beside him. The old wooden floorboards answered every footstep with a familiar creak polished smooth by countless years of visitors. Jacob opened the screen door. Its spring gave the same cheerful squeak it had probably offered every customer for years. Immediately, another world welcomed them. The cool interior smelled wonderfully familiar. Fresh coffee beans, leather harnesses, soap, molasses, barrels of flour, cedar shelves, dry tobacco, lantern oil. Each scent blended together into something uniquely American. Sunlight streamed through tall front windows, illuminating tiny dust particles drifting peacefully through the still air. Behind the polished wooden counter stood Mr. Harper himself. His neatly trimmed gray beard matched the silver strands beneath his well-worn cap. Round spectacles rested comfortably upon his nose as he carefully entered figures into a thick, leather-bound ledger. Looking up, he smiled immediately. "Jacob, good afternoon!" And young Thomas. Thomas removed his hat politely. "Good afternoon, sir." Mr. Harper closed the ledger with gentle care. "I heard you've nearly finished your spring planting." Jacob nodded. "The weather has been generous. Let's hope it stays that way." Thomas slowly wandered along the wooden shelves while the adults quietly discussed seed prices, weather, and neighboring farms. Glass jars filled with colorful penny candy stood beside neatly stacked tins of baking powder. Folded fabrics rested upon high shelves. Boxes of nails, iron hinges, handmade brushes, pocket knives, lantern chimneys. Everything a farming family might need could be found somewhere inside the little store. Nothing appeared fancy. Everything appeared useful. Thomas especially admired the large wall clock hanging near the counter. Its steady ticking filled quiet moments without disturbing them. Tick, tick, tick. Its patient rhythm somehow made the entire store feel even calmer. Outside, Charlie waited peacefully beneath the shade of an old maple tree, flicking his tail now, And then, while another gentle spring afternoon slowly unfolded across the quiet American countryside, the long walk home beneath the evening sky, Mr. Harper carefully wrapped Sarah's purchases in thick brown paper before securing each bundle with sturdy cotton string. Years of experience had taught his hands to move with quiet confidence. Every knot was neat, every package balanced comfortably for carrying home. Jacob thanked him warmly as he placed the parcels into a small wooden crate beside the door. "I appreciate it, Samuel," Mr. Harper smiled. "Safe travels. Give my regards to Sarah and Clara." "I certainly will." Thomas tipped his hat politely once again before following his father onto the porch. The late afternoon sun had softened into a rich golden light that stretched long shadows across the quiet village street. The warmth of the day lingered gently in the air, but the first hints of evening coolness drifted down from the surrounding hills. Charlie lifted his head the moment he heard Jacob's footsteps. "There you are, old friend." Jacob stroked the horse's neck before fastening the crate securely inside the wagon. Nothing rattled loosely. Every package had its place. A careful farmer knew that protecting supplies on the journey home saved unnecessary work later. The wagon rolled slowly away from the general store, its familiar wooden wheels humming softly over the packed dirt road. The village gradually slipped behind them. The church steeple became smaller with every gentle turn of the road. Smoke curled peacefully from several chimneys as families prepared their evening meals. Children's laughter faded into the distance until only birds and the slow rhythm of Charlie's steady hoofbeats remained. Neither Jacob nor Thomas hurried their conversation. The quiet countryside invited slower thoughts. They passed fields where fresh spring wheat shimmered like pale green silk beneath the breeze. Nearby, an elderly farmer carefully repaired a split rail fence while his faithful sheepdog rested patiently beside him. The old man paused only long enough to raise one hand in greeting. Jacob returned the gesture with an easy smile. In places like these, simple kindness often replaced long conversations. Farther along the road, a young woman hung freshly washed quilts upon a clothesline stretched between two old apple trees. The colorful fabric lifted gently in the evening breeze like quiet sails catching a peaceful wind. Thomas watched them disappear behind a bend in the road. "Everyone seems busy," Jacob nodded. Spring asks something of every family. He looked toward the distant hills. "But the work feels lighter after winter." Wildflowers covered both sides of the road. Blue lupines, white Queen Anne's lace, golden buttercups, soft purple violets tucked beneath low shrubs. Their gentle fragrance drifted into the wagon whenever the breeze shifted. Above them, swallows glided effortlessly through the open sky. Without warning, one swooped low across the road before climbing gracefully back toward the clouds. Thomas followed its flight until it disappeared into the bright evening light. "I wish flying looked that easy," Jacob chuckled quietly. "It probably doesn't feel as easy as it looks." For a while, they traveled without speaking. The silence never felt uncomfortable. It simply belonged to the landscape. Wooden wheels turned. Leather harnesses creaked softly. Birds sang from distant fence posts. Somewhere beyond a stand of young oak trees, a meadowlark welcomed the approaching evening with its clear, cheerful song. As the road curved beside a gently flowing creek, Jacob eased Charlie to a stop. "We've earned a short rest." Charlie lowered his head gratefully toward the cool water. Thomas climbed down from the wagon and walked to the creek's edge. The surface reflected the sky so clearly that scattered white clouds seemed to float both above and below him. He knelt beside the water and dipped his fingertips into the gentle current. The coolness spread instantly through his hands. Tiny fish darted between smooth stones beneath the clear water. A dragonfly hovered nearby, its delicate wings catching flashes of golden sunlight each time it changed direction. Jacob sat upon a flat rock beneath a large cottonwood tree. He removed his hat and closed his eyes for a brief moment, not to sleep, simply to enjoy the quiet. The cottonwood leaves whispered overhead. The creek murmured steadily over rounded stones. Somewhere deep within the nearby woods, a mourning dove called softly. Everything around them seemed perfectly content simply to exist. Thomas sat beside his father. After several peaceful moments, he finally spoke. "Do you think this place has always sounded like this?" Jacob opened his eyes. "Probably long before we arrived, and long after we're gone." Thomas watched the flowing creek once more. The thought did not make him sad. Instead, it gave him a quiet sense of belonging. The farm, the village, the fields, even this little creek. Each generation cared for them only for a little while before passing them gently to the next. Jacob stood and brushed a few leaves from his trousers. "We should head home." Charlie seemed ready as well. After another drink from the cool creek, the faithful horse settled comfortably back into the harness. The wagon continued toward the Miller farm just as the western sky began glowing with deeper shades of amber, rose, and soft lavender. The long spring day slowly prepared to welcome another peaceful evening across the quiet American countryside. Supper by lamplight and stories around the table. The last stretch of road home felt even quieter as the evening settled gently across the countryside. The western sky glowed with soft shades of amber, rose, and fading gold, while the first cool breeze of night drifted across the open fields. Charlie continued his steady pace without needing encouragement. He knew the way home as well as anyone in the Miller family. The wagon creaked softly over the familiar road, its rhythm blending naturally with the distant chorus of crickets beginning their nightly song. One by one, the day's brighter sounds quietly gave way to gentler ones. The meadowlarks fell silent. Robins settled into the branches of old maple trees. Only an occasional whip-poor-will called from the edge of the woods, announcing that daylight was slowly slipping away. Thomas rested comfortably against the wooden seat. After a full day of planting, repairing fences, and visiting the village, pleasant tiredness settled into his arms and shoulders. It was the satisfying kind of weariness that came from honest work rather than hurried living. Ahead, the Miller farmhouse slowly appeared beyond the orchard. Warm light already glowed from several windows. Thin curls of smoke rose peacefully from the chimney, carrying with them the comforting scent of burning oak and hickory. Sarah had already begun preparing supper. As Charlie entered the familiar yard, Clara stepped onto the porch with an eager smile. "You're home!" Jacob laughed softly. Right on time, she hurried to help carry the neatly wrapped parcels from Harper's General Store while Thomas carefully untied the wooden crate from the wagon. Inside were simple necessities: a fresh sack of flour, lamp oil, a spool of thread, coffee beans, a small block of cheese, a few sticks of cinnamon. Nothing extravagant. Only the quiet comforts that helped a household move peacefully from one season into the next. Sarah welcomed them at the kitchen door. The warm aroma drifting from inside made Thomas instantly aware of how hungry the day had made him. A large cast-iron pot rested above gentle coals inside the wood-burning stove. Its rich fragrance filled nearly every corner of the farmhouse. Vegetable stew simmered slowly with carrots, potatoes, onions, celery, and tender pieces of beef that had cooked for hours until almost falling apart. Beside the stove, fresh biscuits rested beneath a clean linen towel, still warm from the oven. A small crock of homemade butter waited beside a jar of apple preserves prepared the previous autumn. The kitchen itself glowed beneath the gentle light of 2 kerosene lamps. Their golden flames reflected softly from polished wooden cupboards and well-used cooking utensils hanging neatly upon the wall. Everything felt warm, safe, peaceful. Jacob removed his hat before quietly bowing his head. The rest of the family joined him around the sturdy oak table. The prayer was simple, a quiet expression of gratitude for another day's work, for the planted fields, for healthy animals, for kind neighbors, and for another meal shared together. When the prayer ended, no one hurried to begin eating. Sarah carefully filled each bowl before passing warm biscuits around the table. Thomas broke one open. Steam drifted gently upward. He spread a little fresh butter across the soft bread and watched it slowly melt into every warm layer. Nothing from the general store tasted quite like food prepared at home. Outside, twilight continued settling across the farm. The windows reflected the gentle glow of the lamps, while beyond them the fields gradually disappeared into soft shades of blue and gray. Only the white fence rails remained faintly visible beneath the evening sky. Conversation came naturally, never loudly, never all at once. Jacob asked Clara about the vegetable garden. "The peas are climbing well," she said proudly. "And I found 2 ladybugs on the bean plants." Sarah smiled. "That's a good sign." Thomas described the fox tracks beside the creek. "I almost missed them." Jacob nodded. The land always tells a story if you take time to notice. Sarah looked thoughtfully toward the window. "Your grandfather used to say exactly the same thing." Thomas smiled. "I think I would have liked hearing his stories." Jacob rested his spoon for a moment. He wasn't a man of many words, but when he spoke, Sarah finished gently. Everyone listened. Silence settled comfortably around the table for a few peaceful moments. Not an awkward silence, simply one filled with shared memories. Outside, a gentle breeze stirred the branches of the old maple tree beside the porch. Its leaves whispered softly against one another. The sound blended beautifully with distant frogs calling from the creek beyond the pasture. After supper, Clara gathered the empty bowls while Sarah carefully wrapped the remaining biscuits inside clean cloth for tomorrow's breakfast. Jacob carried another armful of split oak logs to the small wood box beside the stove. Thomas helped wipe the sturdy oak table until its smooth surface reflected the gentle lamplight once again. Every family member had a small task. No one needed reminding. Years of habit had quietly woven responsibility into the rhythm of daily life. Before long, the kitchen stood clean once more. The fire burned lower. The lamps glowed a little softer. Outside, the first bright stars quietly appeared above the peaceful American countryside. The long spring day had come to its gentle close, and another calm evening wrapped itself around the Miller farm like a familiar blanket, inviting everyone toward rest before tomorrow's quiet work would begin once again. The last glow of sunset slowly faded beyond the distant hills, leaving behind a sky painted in soft lavender, pale amber, and deepening shades of blue. Across the Miller farm, the busy sounds of the day gradually surrendered to the quieter rhythm of evening. The planted fields rested peacefully beneath the cooling air, while the orchard stood almost motionless except for the occasional flutter of new spring leaves. After the supper dishes had been washed and carefully returned to their familiar places, Sarah extinguished the kitchen stove's brighter flame, leaving only a gentle bed of glowing embers that would keep the room comfortably warm well into the night. The pleasant scent of baked biscuits and vegetable stew still lingered in the house, mixing with the faint fragrance of beeswax polish on the old wooden furniture. Jacob opened the front door, and a cool breeze quietly welcomed the family outside. "Let's enjoy the evening while the weather is kind," he said softly. The porch had become one of the family's favorite places whenever the day's work was complete. Its wide wooden floorboards had been worn smooth by many years of careful footsteps, and the sturdy rocking chairs carried small marks left by generations who had spent countless peaceful evenings watching the countryside settle into darkness. Sarah placed a folded quilt across the porch swing before sitting beside Clara. Thomas lowered himself into one of the rocking chairs, stretching his legs comfortably after another full day in the fields. Jacob leaned both hands upon the porch railing for a moment, looking across the farm that had quietly occupied nearly every hour of his life. From the porch, nearly everything could be seen. The red-painted barn stood quietly beneath the fading sky. Beyond it rested the pasture, where Charlie and Daisy grazed peacefully through the last light of day. The vegetable garden appeared as neat rows of dark earth waiting patiently for another sunrise. Farther away, the freshly planted cornfield stretched across the gentle hillside, still empty to the eye but already filled with silent promise beneath the soil. The first evening star appeared above the eastern horizon. Clara noticed it almost immediately. "I think that's the first one," Sarah smiled gently. "It always seems brighter after a clear spring day." Thomas searched the sky until he found it shining quietly above the distant treetops. "It's hard to believe people have been looking at that same star for hundreds of years," Jacob nodded. "And long before this farm existed." Silence settled once more. It never felt empty. The countryside itself seemed to speak through smaller sounds. Crickets had begun their nightly chorus among the tall grasses. Tree frogs answered from the shallow pond near the willow trees. Somewhere beyond the orchard, an owl called once before, becoming silent again. The breeze carried the sweet fragrance of blooming apple blossoms across the yard. Each breath felt wonderfully fresh after the warmth of the afternoon. A lantern hanging beside the front door cast a soft circle of amber light across the porch floor. Tiny moths soon appeared, circling the warm glow with slow, gentle movements. Clara watched them with quiet fascination. "They always come when the lantern is lit." Sarah laughed softly. "I imagine they enjoy peaceful evenings as much as we do." Jacob settled into his rocking chair at last. Its familiar creak blended naturally with every gentle movement. Back and forth, slowly, never hurried. Thomas found himself matching the same easy rhythm without even noticing. The chairs seemed almost designed to encourage slower thoughts. Across the road, a pair of white-tailed deer stepped cautiously from the edge of the woods into a nearby meadow. Their movements were graceful and unhurried. They lowered their heads to graze, pausing only now and then to listen for unfamiliar sounds. Clara whispered instinctively. "They're beautiful," Jacob smiled. "They've been visiting that meadow every spring for as long as I can remember. No one disturbed them. The deer belong to the land just as surely as the old maple tree beside the porch or the creek winding quietly through the valley." Above them, the sky continued changing almost unnoticed. The last traces of orange disappeared. Deep blue slowly replaced them. More stars quietly revealed themselves one after another until the heavens seemed filled with countless tiny lights stretching far beyond anything the eye could measure. Thomas leaned back in his chair. "When I was younger, I thought there couldn't possibly be that many stars." Jacob looked upward. "I still think that sometimes." Sarah rested her hands comfortably in her lap. "My mother used to tell us that every season has its own sky." Thomas turned toward her. What did she mean? "The winter stars seem sharper." She smiled thoughtfully. "Summer skies feel endless." She looked toward the quiet horizon. "But spring," her voice became almost a whisper. "Spring skies always seem hopeful." No one hurried to answer. Some thoughts simply deserved time to settle gently into the evening air. The old clock inside the farmhouse struck 8 slow notes. Its sound drifted softly through the open windows before disappearing once more into the peaceful countryside. The family remained on the porch a little longer, watching darkness quietly embrace the fields that had provided their living and shaped their days. Tomorrow would bring more work. The animals would still need tending. The garden would continue growing. The newly planted corn would wait patiently beneath the earth. But none of tomorrow's responsibilities seemed heavy while sitting together beneath the calm American sky. For now, there was only the cool spring breeze, the steady song of crickets, the gentle rocking of old wooden chairs, and the comforting feeling that another ordinary day had been lived with quiet purpose upon the Miller farm. The night deepened gently over the Miller farm, wrapping every fence, pasture, and field beneath a quiet blanket of darkness. The stars shone with remarkable clarity above the countryside, their steady light reflecting faintly across the slow-moving creek beyond the orchard. A cool spring breeze drifted through the maple branches beside the farmhouse, carrying the sweet scent of damp earth and apple blossoms that had opened only a few days before. One by one, the lamps inside the house were extinguished. The warm glow that had filled the windows slowly disappeared, leaving only the soft silver light of the moon resting upon the white-painted porch and weathered barn roof. Inside, the farmhouse settled into the familiar sounds of sleep. The old grandfather clock continued its patient rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. Its steady voice had measured countless ordinary evenings within these walls, never hurried, never delayed, quietly reminding every generation that peaceful days were built 1 hour at a time. Jacob rested comfortably beneath a hand-stitched quilt that Sarah's mother had sewn many years earlier. After another day spent planting fields, repairing fences, and traveling into the village, his body welcomed the deep rest earned through honest work. Nearby, Sarah slept peacefully as the cool night air drifted gently through the slightly opened bedroom window. Across the hallway, Thomas lay awake for only a few moments longer. He watched moonlight stretch across the wooden floor before finally closing his eyes. His thoughts drifted not toward tomorrow's work, but toward the quiet beauty of the day that had just passed. The fresh corn resting beneath dark soil, the peaceful road leading into town, Mr. Harper's welcoming store, the gentle supper shared beneath warm lamplight, the stars above the porch, simple moments. Yet together they formed a life that felt rich in ways no ledger could ever measure. Outside, Charlie stood comfortably inside the barn beside Daisy. Fresh straw covered the floor. The horses shifted only occasionally before returning to quiet rest. A barn owl glided silently through the rafters before disappearing into the darkness beyond the hayloft. Nothing disturbed the peaceful rhythm of the farm. Only nature continued its gentle work. Far beyond the hills, the first invisible hints of morning slowly approached. Long before the sun appeared, the night itself began changing. The stars nearest the eastern horizon gradually faded. The deep blue sky softened almost imperceptibly. Even the cool breeze seemed to carry a different feeling. Spring mornings often arrived this way, quietly, patiently, without asking anyone to hurry. Soon, somewhere across the neighboring pasture, a single rooster welcomed the coming day with a clear morning call. Another answered from a more distant farm, then another. Their voices rolled gently across the countryside until silence slowly surrendered to awakening life. Jacob opened his eyes. For a few peaceful moments, he remained still, listening. The familiar sounds comforted him. Birds beginning their morning songs, leaves whispering softly outside, the distant lowing of cattle. Every sound belonged exactly where it should. He dressed quietly in the dim light, careful not to disturb Sarah. His work clothes remained neatly folded upon the wooden chair where he had left them the evening before. The heavy denim trousers, suspenders, a clean cotton shirt, well-worn leather boots. His broad-brimmed felt hat weighted upon the peg beside the door. Before stepping outside, Jacob paused briefly beside the kitchen window. The eastern sky now glowed with the faintest ribbon of pale gold beyond the rolling hills. Morning had arrived. The screen door opened with its familiar gentle creak. Cool air immediately surrounded him. Fresh, crisp, filled with the unmistakable scent of dew resting upon grass and newly turned earth. Tiny droplets covered every fence rail. Spider webs stretched between garden stakes, sparkling like delicate lace beneath the first traces of dawn. Jacob crossed the quiet yard toward the barn. Charlie greeted him with a soft breath before the stable door had fully opened. "There you are, old friend." Jacob smiled warmly, rubbing the horse's forehead. Charlie leaned comfortably into the familiar touch. Years of working together had built a quiet understanding between them. Very few words were ever needed. Fresh hay filled the feeding troughs. Cool well water waited inside clean wooden buckets. Jacob worked steadily but never rushed. Even the simplest chores deserved careful attention. As Charlie enjoyed his breakfast, Jacob brushed the horse's coat with slow, even strokes. The chestnut hair caught the growing morning light beautifully. Nearby, Daisy patiently waited her turn, occasionally flicking her ears toward the cheerful sparrows, now filling the barnyard with song. Outside, the farm slowly awakened. Smoke began rising from the farmhouse chimney. Sarah had already lit the kitchen stove. Soon the comforting aroma of fresh coffee drifted across the yard, followed by the warm scent of biscuits baking inside the cast-iron oven. Thomas stepped onto the porch, stretching comfortably as he admired the sunrise spreading across the eastern sky. Golden light rolled gently over the fields, the orchard, the pasture, the creek. Every familiar corner of the farm slowly emerged from shadow. The newly planted cornfield remained unchanged to the eye. Yet beneath its peaceful surface, life had already begun its silent work. Thomas smiled quietly. His father had been right. The biggest changes often happened where no one could yet see them. He took a deep breath of the cool spring air before walking toward the barn, ready to begin another ordinary day on the Miller farm. Another day that would quietly add its own small chapter to the enduring story of rural America beneath the open sky. Tonight, dear friend, the final hours of our quiet journey settle over the little American town like a soft autumn blanket. The last amber glow has faded from the western sky, and one by one, warm windows begin to shine against the cool evening air. The familiar streets that carried wagons, laughter, and hard-working neighbors throughout the day now welcome a slower rhythm. Nothing feels hurried anymore. Even the breeze seems content to wander at its own peaceful pace. The general store closes with the gentle sound of its wooden door, and the owner pauses for a moment before turning the key. He looks down the quiet street where lanterns sway gently above weathered boardwalks. Across the road, the blacksmith has already banked the forge for the night. The bright orange fire that once danced inside the workshop now glows only faintly beneath a blanket of warm ash, patiently waiting for another morning. From somewhere beyond the rows of clapboard houses comes the distant whistle of a steam locomotive. It is softer now than it seemed earlier in the day, carried gently across open fields where rows of harvested corn stand quietly beneath the moon. The sound reminds everyone that the wider world continues moving beyond their peaceful community. Yet here, life still follows the comforting rhythm of familiar faces and ordinary routines. A young school teacher finishes correcting the final pages of her students' handwriting lessons. She carefully stacks the papers beside a well-used history book before blowing out the oil lamp. Outside her small home, fallen maple leaves gather along the porch steps, rustling gently whenever the evening breeze passes by. Tomorrow she will greet another classroom filled with curious children, but tonight she allows herself the simple comfort of silence. Not far away, An elderly carpenter runs his hand across the smooth surface of a rocking chair he completed only hours before. Every curve has been shaped patiently with hand tools polished by decades of use. He smiles quietly, knowing that somewhere a family will soon spend peaceful evenings gathered around this very chair. Without saying a word, he carries it carefully into the corner of his workshop, where it joins other pieces waiting for delivery at sunrise. Along the edge of town, smoke rises slowly from farmhouse chimneys. Inside one kitchen, a mother stirs a final pot of warm cider, while her youngest daughter carefully folds clean quilts beside the fire. The scent of cinnamon, apples, and seasoned oak fills every corner of the room. Their old farmhouse has weathered many winters already, yet each season has left behind another layer of cherished memories resting quietly within its sturdy wooden walls. Nearby, a farmer steps outside one last time before bed. He pauses beside the fence where his horses stand peacefully beneath the stars. Their gentle breathing mixes with the soft chirping of crickets hidden among the tall grass. He checks each gate almost without thinking, repeating the same evening routine he has followed for countless years. Such habits ask for little attention now. They have become part of the quiet language between hardworking people and the land they care for. Down by the river, the old water wheel turns more slowly than it did during daylight hours. Moonlight glitters across the moving water, transforming every ripple into silver. Frogs sing patiently from the reeds while an owl watches silently from a great oak tree overlooking the mill pond. The mill itself stands peacefully in the darkness, its heavy beams creaking gently as if settling into sleep alongside the town it has faithfully served for generations. At the railway station, only a single lantern remains lit beneath the broad wooden canopy. Earlier in the evening, passengers arrived carrying trunks, parcels, and hopeful dreams. Now the platform rests empty, except for a station clock quietly marking each passing minute. Somewhere beyond the darkness, another train continues its long journey across America, connecting towns like this one with distant cities and endless possibilities. Inside the modest church near the center of town, moonlight filters through stained glass windows, painting gentle colors across the worn wooden pews. The building feels completely different now than it did on Sunday morning, when neighbors gathered together in their finest clothes. Tonight only silence remains, accompanied by the faint scent of old pine, polished wood, and candle wax lingering in the cool air. Across the countryside, fields stretch peacefully beneath a sky filled with countless stars. The harvest has nearly ended, and neat rows of bundled hay wait quietly for tomorrow's wagons. Barn cats patrol the edges of the fields while dairy cows rest comfortably inside warm wooden barns. Every creature seems to understand that the day's work has finished. If you were to walk these roads tonight, you would notice how gently everything slows after sunset. Without automobiles rushing past or electric lights filling the horizon, darkness becomes something comforting rather than frightening. It invites conversation to soften, footsteps to slow, and thoughts to settle peacefully like leaves floating upon a quiet stream. Many of the people living here could never imagine the extraordinary inventions that the coming century would bring. Airplanes, television, computers, satellites, and the internet all remain far beyond their imagination. Yet perhaps they possess something that many people continue searching for today: an unhurried evening shared with family, neighbors, and the familiar sounds of home. History often remembers famous inventors, presidents, industrial leaders, and great moments of change. But places like this remind us that America was built just as surely by ordinary school teachers, blacksmiths, railroad workers, carpenters, farmers, merchants, mothers, children, and grandparents who quietly lived each day with patience, kindness, and determination. Their stories rarely appeared in newspapers. Few statues would ever be raised in their honor. Yet every porch they built, every loaf they baked, every lesson they taught, every harvest they gathered, and every neighbor they helped became part of the foundation upon which future generations would stand. As midnight approaches, even the wind seems to whisper more softly through the towering maple trees lining the streets. Porch swings move almost imperceptibly. Curtains rest peacefully behind glowing windows. Somewhere a grandfather finishes reading one last chapter from a favorite book before carefully placing it beside his bed. Across town, a little boy hugs his handmade quilt while dreaming about tomorrow's adventures beside the river. The moon climbs higher overhead, bathing rooftops, barns, fences, churches, workshops, and quiet country roads in gentle silver light. The town itself seems to breathe slowly, peacefully, almost as though every building remembers the countless lives that have unfolded within its walls. And perhaps that is the greatest gift history offers us. Not merely names or dates, not only inventions or great events, but the quiet reminder that ordinary lives have always mattered. Every peaceful evening, every shared meal, every careful craft, every neighborly smile, every familiar path home. Long before our own time, people found comfort beneath the very same moon that watches over us tonight. As our journey gently comes to its end, allow yourself to leave this peaceful little American town exactly as you found it. Quiet, welcoming, and filled with simple moments that ask for nothing except your gentle attention. The lanterns slowly fade. The last window grows dark. The river continues its endless song. And somewhere, beyond the whispering trees and sleeping fields, another peaceful night quietly becomes history.